Imagine sitting inside a T-72 tank in the Iraqi desert on February 26, 1991. You're a tanker in the Tawakalna Division, Saddam Hussein's elite Republican Guard. You've survived 8 brutal years of war against Iran. You know how to fight. You're dug into a defensive position you've trained on for months, your 125-millimeter gun pointed west, waiting for the Americans everyone says are coming. Then your tank explodes. You never saw a thing. That's not a dramatization. That's what happened to dozens of Iraqi tank crews in 23 minutes on that February afternoon. They died at their guns, fighting an enemy they literally could not see. And in those 23 minutes, an entire generation of Soviet tank doctrine, the foundation of armored warfare for half the world, died with them. This is the story of the Battle of 73 Easting, but not the version you've heard, not the triumphant tale of American technological dominance. Today, we're going to look at it from the other side of the gun sight, because what the Iraqi tankers experienced that day reveals something far more important than another American victory. It reveals the moment modern warfare changed forever. To understand what happened at 73 Easting, you first have to understand what the Tawakalna Division was, and what they thought they were facing. The Tawakalna wasn't some collection of poorly trained conscripts. These were Saddam's elite. The name itself means trust in God. It was a mechanized division of the Republican Guard, equipped with Iraq's best tanks, the Soviet-designed T-72. Many of these men had combat experience from the Iran-Iraq War, 8 years of brutal fighting that had hardened them into professional soldiers. They'd faced human wave attacks, chemical weapons, and grinding attrition. They knew what war looked like. Their commander at the position Eagle Troop would hit was a man known as Major Mohammed. He'd actually graduated from the United States Army's Infantry Officer Advanced Course at Fort Benning, Georgia. He knew American doctrine. He knew how Americans fought, and he'd prepared accordingly. Mohammed had set up a textbook defense. He'd fortified an abandoned village along an east-west road, positioning anti-aircraft guns for ground fire, machine guns, and infantry. He'd built 2 kill zones on the eastern side of a subtle ridge, north and south of the village, designed to catch any force trying to advance. He'd laid minefields. He'd dug in approximately 40 T-72 tanks and 16 BMP infantry fighting vehicles about 1,000 meters from the ridge. Behind them, he'd positioned a reserve of 18 more T-72s along another ridgeline about 3,000 meters further east. His plan was sound. Catch the Americans as they crested the ridge, destroy them piecemeal in his kill zones, then counterattack with his reserve. It was exactly what American officers would have designed. But Mohammed made one critical assumption. He believed the Americans would have to move along roads to navigate the featureless desert. After all, how else could anyone find their way across hundreds of miles of nothing but sand? There were no landmarks, no terrain features to navigate by. He had no idea the Americans had something called GPS. On the American side, Captain H.R. McMaster commanded Eagle Troop of the 2nd Squadron, 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment. He was 28 years old, a West Point graduate who would later become a 3-star general and national security advisor. But on that February day, he was just a young captain leading 9 M1A1 Abrams tanks, 12 M3 Bradley fighting vehicles, and about 140 soldiers into the unknown. The 2nd Cavalry Regiment was the tip of the spear for General Norman Schwarzkopf's famous left hook, the massive flanking maneuver that would sweep around the Iraqi defenses and crush the Republican Guard from the west. Eagle Troop's job was reconnaissance. Find the enemy, fix their position, and let the heavy divisions behind them deliver the knockout blow. They'd crossed into Iraq on February 23rd and had been pushing east for 3 days. The weather was miserable. Rain the night before had turned to fog, then a blinding sandstorm rolled in. Visibility dropped to less than 1,000 meters. The air cavalry was grounded. No helicopter support, no aerial reconnaissance. Eagle Troop was advancing blind. But not really, because inside those Abrams tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles, American crews had something the Iraqis didn't: thermal imaging sights. Second-generation forward-looking infrared systems that could detect heat signatures through dust, smoke, fog, and darkness. While Major Mohammed's tankers were squinting through optical sights that couldn't see past the sandstorm, American gunners could identify targets at 3,000 meters or more. The technological gap was even worse than it sounds. The T-72 variants Iraq possessed, export models and locally built copies called the Lion of Babylon, had no thermal sights at all. Some had older infrared systems that required an active spotlight to illuminate targets, a spotlight that would immediately reveal their position to anyone with passive night vision. Most Iraqi tank crews were limited to daylight optical sights with an effective range of maybe 2,000 meters in perfect conditions. In a sandstorm, they were blind. The Abrams could see everything, and the Iraqis could see nothing. First contact came at 4:07 p.m. Staff Sergeant John McReynolds. Bradley literally drove on top of an Iraqi bunker serving as an observation post. 2 enemy soldiers emerged and surrendered, but before they did, they'd radioed a warning to the forces in the village. The Iraqis knew the Americans were coming, they just couldn't see them yet. Minutes later, Sergeant Morris Harris's Bradley came under 23mm cannon and machine gun fire from the village. His platoon leader's response captures the confidence of American forces that day. When Harris reported he was taking fire, his lieutenant replied simply, "Well, kill them." At 4:20 p.m., Eagle Troop crested a low rise and surprised an Iraqi tank company set up in a reverse slope defense at the 70 Easting, a north-south grid line on the map that American forces were using to mark their progress. Captain McMaster's gunner, Staff Sergeant Craig Koch, reported tanks direct front. McMaster counted 8 T-72s in prepared positions. Here's where the technology gap became lethal. McMaster could see the Iraqi tanks clearly through his thermal sights, hot spots glowing against the cooler desert sand. The Iraqi tankers, staring into a wall of blowing dust, couldn't see the Americans at all. Koch destroyed the first tank, then the second, then all 9 Abrams engaged together as they advanced. Within about a minute, everything in range was in flames. The Iraqis never got a shot off. McMaster pushed forward through the smoke of burning Iraqi vehicles. His executive officer, Lieutenant John Gifford, radioed from the command post. "I know you don't want to know this right now, but you're at the limit of advance. You're at the 70 Easting." McMaster had a choice. His orders said stop, but stopping meant giving up the momentum, letting the enemy reorganize, presenting stationary targets to any Iraqi forces further east. His response would become legendary in military circles. "Tell them we can't stop. Tell them we're in contact and we have to continue this attack. Tell them I'm sorry." Eagle Troop pushed past the limit of advance. 3 kilometers to the east, McMaster could see more T-72s through his thermal sights. Major Mohammed's reserve force, 18 tanks attempting to move out of their assembly area and deploy for a counterattack. They never got the chance. American tanks and Bradleys destroyed them at close range before they could even form up. Some Iraqi crews were still outside their vehicles when the first rounds hit. Major Mohammed himself later told American soldiers he didn't know he was under attack until a soldier ran into his command bunker, yelling that American tanks were among them. Think about that. The commander of the Iraqi position didn't know he was in a battle until his tanks were already burning. The engagement that followed showed just how outmatched the Iraqis were, and also their courage. As Eagle Troop consolidated on the ridge the Iraqi reserve had occupied, waves of T-72s and BMPs counterattacked through a dried riverbed called a wadi. For the next 4 hours, Iraqi armor kept coming. They charged straight into American guns, trying to close the distance, trying to get within their own effective range. They couldn't do it. American thermal sights picked them off at ranges the Iraqis couldn't match even in perfect visibility. The M1A1's 120mm main gun, firing depleted uranium sabot rounds, punched through T-72 armor like it wasn't there. American crews reported killing tanks behind berms. The round would penetrate the sand berm, pass through, and still destroy the tank on the other side. When Iraqi tanks did manage to score hits, the results were equally one-sided. The T-72's 125mm gun simply couldn't penetrate the Abrams composite armor at combat ranges. The few Iraqi rounds that struck American vehicles bounced off or failed to penetrate. At 73 Easting itself, the only American vehicle damaged was an Abrams that hit a mine. And yet the Iraqis kept fighting. They stood their ground when other Iraqi units were surrendering by the thousands. They attempted to maneuver against Eagle Troop. They counterattacked repeatedly through the evening. By the time the fighting slackened around 10 p.m., dozens of Iraqi tanks had been destroyed, but the Republican Guard crews had kept coming. The final tally is staggering. In 23 minutes of primary engagement, Eagle Troop destroyed approximately 50 T-72 tanks, 25 armored personnel carriers, 40 trucks, and numerous other vehicles. American casualties: 0 killed, 0 vehicles lost to enemy fire. When you expand to the full regimental action that day and into the next, the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment destroyed about 160 tanks, 180 personnel carriers, and 12 artillery pieces. 2 brigades of the Republican Guard, the Tawakalna's 18th Mechanized Brigade and 37th Armored Brigade, were effectively annihilated. It was the Republican Guard's first ground defeat. The numbers don't capture the human reality. Inside those burning T-72s were men who had survived the Iran-Iraq War, men who had families in Baghdad and Basra, men who had followed orders and taken positions and waited for an enemy they thought they were ready to fight. They died in the dark, killed by tanks they never saw, at ranges they couldn't reach, with weapons that couldn't penetrate American armor even when they did manage to fire. Their courage was irrelevant. Their experience was irrelevant. Their doctrine was irrelevant. Technology had made all of it meaningless. The Battle of 73 Easting changed how the world thought about armored warfare. Every tank army on the planet watched what happened in that Iraqi desert. The Soviets, whose doctrine the Iraqis had followed, whose tanks the Iraqis had used, saw their entire theory of armored combat demolished in an afternoon. The advantage had shifted decisively. It wasn't about numbers anymore. It wasn't about courage. It wasn't even about tactics. It was about who could see first and shoot first. Thermal sights, laser rangefinders, computerized fire control, stabilized guns that could hit targets while moving at speed. These technologies created a gap that no amount of training or bravery could close. The T-72 didn't become obsolete at 73 Easting. It became a coffin for anyone facing a modern Western tank without equivalent technology. Russia apparently didn't learn that lesson. 31 years later, they invaded Ukraine with an army still built around the T-72 platform. The results have been grimly similar, though this time it's drones and missiles doing what Abrams tanks did at 73 Easting. There's a temptation to tell this story as pure triumph. American technology wins. American training wins. American soldiers are the best in the world. And all of that is true. McMaster's leadership was exceptional. His soldiers performed brilliantly. The M1A1 Abrams proved itself one of the finest tanks ever built. But there's another way to see 73 Easting, as a tragedy, as the moment when individual courage stopped mattering on the armored battlefield. Major Mohammed did everything right. His men fought bravely. They held their positions. They counterattacked. They did exactly what soldiers are supposed to do. And none of it mattered. That's the real legacy of those 23 minutes. Not just American dominance, but the terrifying realization that in modern warfare, being brave isn't enough. Being skilled isn't enough. Being willing to die isn't enough. You have to be able to see your enemy. And in that sandstorm on February 26, 1991, only one side could. If you served in Desert Storm or knew someone who did, I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. What do you remember about those 100 hours? And if you're new to Gulf War Chronicles, hit subscribe. We've got a lot more untold stories from the war that changed everything. Until next time.